Pearlbuck once wrote, "One faces the future with one's past." If I had to attribute this quote to a video game company, it would be Nintendo. But Namco is a close second. Namco has been one of the most celebrated game makers. They've produced hundreds of games, and many don't need an introduction. Pac-Man, Galaga, Pole Position, Dig Dug, people are practically born having played these games. But they also have made many games that are not as well known, like Legend of Valkyrie, Wonder Momo, Dragon Spirit, and more. These are amazing games, and some of my personal favorites. I even bought a PC Engine primarily to play these. To this day, Namco will sneak in references to their classic characters. Clearly, there's a company-wide love for their old-school games. But in 2012, Namco decided that cameos weren't good enough, and so they established Shifty Look. When I first heard about Shifty Look, I was blown away. Shifty Look's goal was to reinvigorate interest in Namco's old IPs, using a multimedia approach. Series included Rolling Thunder, Golly Ghost, Wagonland, Klonoa, Bravoman, Wonder Momo, Valkyrie, Katamari Damacy, and more. There were webcomics, animated shorts, and even a few video games. They didn't skimp out either, bringing on A-list comic book writers like Mike Costa, Ryan North, Jim Palmiotti, and Justin Gray to name a few. A lot of these games are very niche in North America. To see a large-scale effort into revitalizing them made me really excited. I couldn't wait to jump into Shifty Look. Let's take a look at some of the webcomics. Bravoman was probably the flagship series of Shifty Look. It was made by Udon Entertainment, with Matt Moylan as the writer and art by Dax Gordine, with colors by Josh Perez. Matt Moylan was kind enough to tell me how the Bravoman comic came to be.
They came to me with Bravoman because they kind of envisioned some kind of comedy comic for it. So I ran with that. I took a really broad approach to Bravoman that allowed me to do almost anything I wanted. Like, he could break the fourth wall. He was very aware that he was in a webcomic. Some of the other characters were too. We could do single just jokes, like physical comedy, or making fun of video game tropes. Or we could go on multi-part adventures, which we got to do a few times. Dax Gordine was the artist, and was known for his kind of chibi art style. So that worked perfectly for Bravoman. At one point we moved from 2 comics a week to 3 comics a week, and the workload was getting a lot for Dax, so we brought in Josh as a colorist, and he's just great. Josh is also Bravoman's biggest fan. So he was super excited to work on it.
There's plenty of gags about the game's obscurity and the superhero genre as a whole. The cast of characters are great. They play off each other really well, and make reading the comic a great time. They even have Pistol Daimo! He was a boss in the Bravoman game, and would later go on to get his own game. Neat! My favorite character is Anti-Bravoman, based on Black Bravoman from the game. And he just so happens to be Matt's as well.
And I just love that you just want to hug him. He's always trying so hard to be, both menacing and also try to kind of be, try to make friends and stuff. I also like Nega Pigeon, which is a kind of his sidekick that Dax accidentally created. We had a comic where I just wrote in Anti-Bravoman is like monologuing on a rooftop, and he's trying to sound dark and mysterious, and then a bird is sitting near him on a ledge, and it just tweets at him. But instead of drawing like like a blue bird or something, Dax just drew a pigeon. so like, oh, okay. And then the next time we put Anti-Bravoman in a sketch, he drew the pigeon still around him. So he was okay, I guess that's his sidekick now. So he adopted him as a Nega Pigeon.
Guest artists will often be brought on to do some pages, and they were a real treat. One in particular was Bravoman. This is basically what a direct adaptation of the game would be like. In the game, Bravoman was part salaryman, part superhero, that had a wife and kids.
So in the webcomic version, we decided to trim that down, and he's just Bravoman all the time, because it just makes it simpler and less characters for him to have like in tow all the time.
Hitoshi Ariga was the illustrator, best known now as a Pokemon designer.
Hitoshi Ariga is actually a big fan of Bravoman, like the original Bravoman video game, so much so that his manga artist alias, Hitoshi Ariga, most manga artists use an alias. The Hitoshi part comes from Bravoman because that's actually Bravoman's first name in the original video game. Hitoshi Ariga also went on to work on the Klonoa webcomic for Shifty Look, so that's pretty cool.
When Shifty Look was created, I'm sure Namco envisioned something like this. It really nailed the goal of breathing new life into a dormant IP. Bravoman ran for basically all of Shifty Look's life, starting in March 2012 to March 2014 with 300 strips. Dragon Spirit was also made by Udon Entertainment, and featured Jim Zub as the writer and artwork by Stephen Cummings, with Espen Gudejan. In the game, you play as a mole who turns into a dragon to rescue Princess Alicia from the evil Zawel, and that's it. What do you want from an arcade overhead shooter? With such a simple story, Jim was given a lot of creative freedom. A mole is joined by Nydia, an original character made for the comic. Jim told me that having a mole on his own would be boring, and he wanted someone a mole could talk to. They both morph into one dragon body that they share. I think it was a missed opportunity though, and it could have been one dragon with two heads, just like the power-up from the game. Bosses from the game make appearances, although not all of them do. The comic is only 40 pages long, but the artwork and colors are great, and it can be pretty funny. It was something to look forward to every week. Next is the Valkyrie comic, definitely the series I was most interested in. Legend of Valkyrie is one of my favorite games of all time, so I was excited to see how it would be adapted. The game series never left Japan, save for one port of the arcade game on Namco Volume 5 for the PS1. And just as a side note, this collection is what got me into the classic Namco games. It even has Dragon Spirit. Anyway, Valkyrie was initially written by Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray, with art by Fernando Hines Furukawa. Although the Valkyrie games had more involved stories than Dragon Spirit, they were still pretty basic. So the comic features a new story with original characters. It starts off strong with detailed artwork and a high fantasy feeling. Humor is thrown in and the gags are great, but then... Valkyrie starts talking like an otaku. I kept going with the comic, and wouldn't let her speech pattern dissuade me. Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray would write the series until issue 25. This did seem like a sort of ending to the series, or at least a season finale. Ash Paulsen, who was also an associate producer for Shifty Look, would take over as writer until issue 44. And then... whoa. Out of the blue, the art style suddenly changed. I gotta be honest, I was pretty upset at first to see Valkyrie go from this to this, but I eventually softened up. Her otaku speech patterns match this style much more. The game also tended to have a lot of slapstick humor in it, so this style fits. Charlie Davis not only took over the artwork from here on out, but also wrote it. Charlie told me that they had free control about how the story went about. The one thing that could not be changed was Valkyrie's speech quirks. Interesting. And according to Charlie, the reason Jimmy and Justin had to leave the comic was due to scheduling conflicts. One thing to note is that the character Krino Sandra from the games has been split into two characters. First, there's Sandra, who looks identical to the original Krino Sandra. It's revealed she was actually a human turned into a Sandra, Sandra being the name of the species, Sandra. Then there's the human prince, Krino, who was actually a Sandra turned into a human. You following? Krino Sandra is the second most important character in the Valkyrie series. He was the Player 2 character in the arcade game, and he even got his very own Super NES game. Pretty bold of Namco allowing him to be adapted into two separate characters. In short, the Valkyrie comic was a great addition. For research, Charlie said they played every game in the series, and even explored the special Valkyrie-themed room in Namco Museum 5. Nice taste. Their efforts paid off. As a Valkyrie connoisseur, I can attest that a lot of elements from the games made their way into the comic, sometimes in unexpected ways, and is why I found the comic so enjoyable. Now let's look at Scar. Scar. I'm not familiar with a Namco game called Scar. What's this about? Oh. It's Genpei Tomiden. In this game, you play as the resurrected samurai Taira no Kagekyo and fight off against demons, but the comic is a complete departure. Taira no Kagekyo has been renamed to Scar, and instead of demons, he fights cyborgs. Pretty much everything is original to the comic. Genpei Tomiden served only as a loose inspiration. I reached out to Scar's writer, Edmund Shern, for more information about the creation process.
I never played it before. I had to, do a lot of research, Googling and looking at the sprites, trying to see this very pixelated figure and what else could we make it out to be, and then talk to an artist about, designing it. I probably saw some YouTube clips for the gameplay just to get a sense of the game.
Edmund went on to say that the game's obscurity led him to create something different for Shifty Look.
The tricky thing about that title was not many people outside of Japan was familiar with the title. I had several pitches for him, so rather than have a strip called Genpei Tomiden, I came up with another title for it. Scar was born.
He continued that Namco was very open about changing Genpei Tomiden into Scar, and allowed him a lot of creative freedom.
I didn't get any notes at all. I got the sense that these were, especially Genpei Tomaten, was just one of those things that was languishing around and nobody cared anything about it. So they really had no opinion about whether it went this way or that way. I think they just treated it like an experiment.
To my surprise, I found myself very invested in Scar, and it was the comic I enjoyed the most. The world and its look have a very original feel to it, and the pacing is great. The art of the first season was done by Scan Surisu-one. The second season was done by Gunship Revolution's Kamipa and Scary Pet. The second season was also co-written by the Haro brothers. However, it wasn't one of the more popular of the Shifty Look comics. Scar was one of the few comics that wasn't a comedy, which Edmund acknowledged.
There was never a direction from the start that it should be funny. The format would suggest it, but I also grew up with Sunday newspaper comics, and besides the Peanuts, you would have like the Tarzans and some of the serious comic strips as well. So I gravitated towards those, and I used that as kind of the inspiration for the tone. Obviously, the cute and funny stuff like Momo, did very well with the readership. So after that, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I gone down the wrong path.
Like he mentioned, the comic Wonder Momo, based off of the game of the same name, was one of the more popular comics coming from Shifty Look. Udon Entertainment was once again behind the series. Jim Zub wrote it along with Eric Ko, with the art done by Omar Dogan. Jim told me that Namco requested them to modernize Wonder Momo, without it losing the kooky qualities the game had. According to him, the comic is his and Eric's love letter to retro games, 80s anime, and Sentai shows, which is perfect, as the game was meant to look like a Sentai stage show. One thing special about the comic is that this Wonder Momo isn't the Wonder Momo from the arcade game. Her real name is Momoko, and she's the daughter of the original Wonder Momo. Jim said that when they started to write the series in 2012, 25 years had passed since the game's release. In real time, the teenage Momo would be in her early 40s. In his words, that gave them a perfect opportunity to shift the timeline forward and introduce a new generation of characters. One of these characters is Amazona. In the original game, Amazona was Momo's rival. While the original appears in flashback, a new character, named Akio, has become the new Amazona. The comic is very similar in nature to Bravoman, except there's an actual plot going on. Nothing too crazy. Momoko, her mother, and Akio must defend the world from the Waru. Regardless, Wonder Momo is colorful, humorous, and full of personality. It's easy to see why this caught on, and it ran for 200 pages. In fact, it's worth pointing out that Wonder Momo and Bravoman got physical books released. Unfortunately, a second volume had to be cancelled for both, due to Shifty Look's closure. These books contain practically the entire history of the characters. They even have trivia only mega nerds like me know about. Wow, they even mentioned Momo's appearance in Famitsu 2011. But I bet they don't know about her cameo in Marvel Land. Oh wow, they covered all their bases. There was also a physical release of the Katamari comic. But instead of discussing that, let's shift towards the cartoons. There were a few animated series made for Shifty Look, in fact. Most were available for free on YouTube. The first was, of course, Bravoman. 12 episodes were made, each about 5 minutes in length. Production value is really high. It looks like a cartoon made for television. The show was animated by Copernicus Studios, the same studio behind Teen Titans Go. Voice talent included Rob Paulsen as the titular hero.
Let the total epicness begin! Beep, 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 beep. Oh, now what?
Bravoman, come quick! A Capricorn sea serpent is attacking the marina!
Along with D. Bradley Baker.
People will cry out for anti-Bravoman to save them, and I'll... It's tough to do a good gravelly voice.
Romy Dames.
I'm a ninja princess. Ha! Pretty neat, eh?
And Jennifer Hale.
Kinda convoluted, but it'll do. For now.
Like the comic, there's no storyline. It's just Bravoman and co. doing whatever. But there's a very nostalgic feeling to the show, from the laid-back opening to how the title cards are presented. The theme song was written and composed by Randy Rogo, who also wrote and composed the famous Nations of the World song from Animaniacs.
Norway and Sweden and Iceland and Finland and Germany now in peace. Switzerland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Italy, Turkey and Greece.
The same team that worked on the comic were in charge of the show, although there were a few other writers, depending on the episode.
I wrote 9 of them, and Jim Zub wrote 3 of them, and they're super fun.
It's also worth pointing out that the ending theme was done by the band Area 11. Eagle-eyed viewers can find a lot of Easter eggs, referencing Namco games new and old. My favorite episode is probably the 10th one. I won't say what happens as it needs to be seen. Also, special mention to the 6th episode, where it's just a bunch of mini skits happening back to back, including a fake commercial for fake Bravoman toys.
I also really like the secret society of antagonists, which is just all the bad guys hanging out, and there's not really like any big conflict. It's just them hanging out and coming up, what's the best plan to destroy Bravoman.
As for the final episode, well, you can't help but feel a little sentimental, as the characters are aware it's the last one. You get the impression that everyone involved really enjoyed working on the show.
Hey, it's Mappy!
Next, there was Mappy. You know Mappy, right? The little mouse guy? Funny this got a cartoon, considering there wasn't a Mappy comic. Main premise is, Mappy works as a security guard at Namco. Each episode usually focuses on a different Namco property, like Time Crisis, Yokai Dojuki, and even Muscle March. Animation is limited, and character mouths don't move. Ever. But the show wears that as a badge of honor. Bravoman even makes an appearance for the final few episodes.
Super unequaled hero of excellence.
Hey, that isn't Rob Paulsen.
That's a professional voice actor. Those are just cartoons.
Oh, that explains it. That's actually Dax Gordine doing Bravoman's voice here. The show was made by Scott Kurtz and Chris Straub, makers of the webcomics PvP and Star Slip, respectively. They really know their Namco history. In fact, the offices of Namco are a dead ringer for the then Namco headquarters in Tokyo. Overall, the Mappy series was great, and has a very subtle sense of humor, with some visual gags you need to keep your eye out for. Having Mappy interact with different Namco characters is such a simple, yet genius idea. I wish there were more episodes. I also like how they scat the Mappy theme. Finally, there was an anime of Wonder Momo. This one had 5 episodes, each about 7 minutes in length. The anime was done by Graphinica, best known now for the movie Hello World. It aired simultaneously on Nico Nico in Japan and Crunchyroll in the West. This is basically the only piece of ShiftyLook media you can still find online from its original source. Concept-wise, it's an abridged retelling of the comic. Some things are moved around here and there, but the story is still the same, although this feels more like an ad for the comic, or a proof of concept, so to speak. One thing interesting to note is that the original Momo is voiced by Haruko Momoi. Momoi is a singer and voice actress, and has been closely associated with the Wonder Momo game. One of her most well-known singles is Wonder Momoi, New Recording. The entire song is composed of tunes from the arcade game. She has even dressed up as Wonder Momo on stage. In fact, Namco were the ones that suggested to Momoi to make a song using the Wonder Momo music, but I don't believe they own it, though they included it in Taiko no Tatsujin and the Idolmaster series. See, it says so right there in the book. Momoi actually voiced Momo in the 2011 game Queen's Gate Spiral Chaos. I'm glad they were consistent and cast her for the anime. The techno score was done by Alex Kulang, author of Buttersafe and even the Katamari comic. It's a good update for some of the old Momo music. Speaking of music, the opening song is called Wonder Wars. It was composed once again by Area 11, and the singers are Momoko's and Akio's voice actresses, Yuka Fujiwara and Misaki Komatsu respectively. Together they formed Fujiko Mattoon. I'll mention this here because it doesn't really fit anywhere else, but I think Namco's original intention was to have their own idol group for Shifty Look. They had a few other songs and even did live performances. Anyway, back to the anime. By itself, the anime isn't too special, but it does complement the other Wonder Momo stuff very well. Plus it helped expand the brand, and give all the characters voices. So that is something. It should be no surprise a few video games were produced by Shifty Look. After all, these are video game characters. Here's Bravoman Binja Bash. Aww. It required an online connection, and the servers have been shut down, so it's no longer playable. Naturally, it shared the same art style as the comic and cartoon. It was a simple auto-running game, with the player touching the screen to extend Bravoman's arms and do other actions. It was fine. While the game was free to play, there were microtransactions. This included instantly unlocking characters to upgrading them. It was a time waster, something to play here and there. Admittedly, I didn't play it all that much. Namco High. Possibly the most well-known thing to come out of Shifty Look. I remember when this was announced, and even attended the Shifty Look panel at New York Comic Con 2013. The game was developed by Date Nighto and What Pumpkin Studios, and the creative lead was Andrew Hussey of Homestuck fame, with writers Anath Panagaria, Magnolia Porter, and Brian Clevinger, author of 8-Bit Theater. Brian was willing to answer a lot of questions I had about the game's creation. Surprisingly, the game was made in about 3 months or so. If you haven't guessed, it's a dating sim that was entirely playable in an internet browser. You play as the cousin of the prince from Katamari Damacy, and can date, or at least develop meaningful relations, with many different Namco characters that attend Namco High. The available characters aren't just limited to those featured in the Shifty Look comics. Brian said they got a list of characters they were able to choose from, and narrowed down their selection from there. There's the Galaga ship, Lolo from Klonoa, Valkyrie, Anti-Bravoman, Miyauki from Mappy, Donko from Taiko no Tatsujin, Albatross from Rolling Thunder, Nydia, Mr. Driller, Blue Max from Sky Kid, Hiromi from Burning Force, Akio, Tyra, Tamari from Ordyne, and Richard Miller from Time Crisis. There's also 3 characters from Homestuck, Terraze, Jane, and Dave Sprite. The first 6 characters were free, but everyone else had to be purchased. Story-wise, you get detention, and in there you meet the other students. The principal is Dig Dug, and his assistant is, oh hell yeah! It's King! King's there to keep everyone in line, and he's quite successful at intimidating them. I'll assume they're afraid of getting a rolling death cradle. Standard for the genre, your actions will affect relationships with the characters. There's not as many options compared to a typical dating sim. It basically boils down to who you want to spend your time with. Playthroughs aren't very long, and you're able to fast forward through text to make replays more bearable. But what makes the experience worthwhile is the writing. The characters and their stories are extremely fleshed out. Blue Max was Brian's favorite to write for, as it's very cathartic, and he found Richard Miller's to be the toughest. At times, it can get a little heartwarming. You can tell a lot of research went into the characters, and wanting to stay true to the source material. For example, they actually acknowledge Mr. Driller's father as Dig Dug, just like in the Mr. Driller series. As for his mother, they mention her quite a lot in Namco High, but she's never seen. Little known fact is that Tobi Masio from the game Baraduke is Mr. Driller's mother and Dig Dug's ex-wife. Oh, here she is in Hiromi's route. Wait, what? That's kind of weird. She's not in the route with her son and ex-husband, but is in the route with Hiromi. Tobi and Hiromi being friends is a parallel to them being a pair-up unit in Namco Cross Capcom. The writers had to have looked that up. There's no other connection the two characters have. And if they knew Dig Dug was Mr. Driller's father, wouldn't they also know Tobi was the mother? Weird. Man, Brian had no idea either. At some point in every route, Pac-Man abruptly comes in to give everyone words of encouragement. Be true to yourself. No one ever seems bothered by this, it's like it's something they expect to happen. Behind the scenes, Brian said they got stuck on coming up with how to progress one of the stories. He took inspiration from teen angst shows and how there's always the good adult that pushes the characters forward. So he came up with Pac-Man, saying be true to yourself. And then they got stuck with the same problem for another character, and that's when they realized Pac-Man needed to be the running gag of the game. Speaking of Pac-Man, during the climax, he's taken hostage by evil Namco High. The choices you made will determine who will join the fight to save him. You and your date, or maybe another combination. All in all, Namco High was a fascinating game. It's not every day a big game company makes a dating sim with their characters. It never takes itself too seriously as an actual dating sim, and it's very lighthearted, so it has wide appeal. You can tell there's a lot of passion in it. I would love to see this revisited with more characters. Next, here's Wonder Momo Typhoon Booster. Luckily, this one didn't require an online connection and can still be played, although it has since been delisted. The game was developed by WayForward, with James Montagna as director. I had the pleasure of speaking with James, and he told me he was already very familiar with the original Wonder Momo game. In fact, he's called it his spirit game, as it was released on the day he was born. He also mentioned that many people at WayForward were familiar with Wonder Momo, which led to him and WayForward creative director Matt Paulsen pitching a new Momo game to Namco. It was released for Android devices, primarily platforms that were powered by the Nvidia Tegra chip, like the Nvidia Shield and the Mad Catz Mojo. Yes, really. It was also released on the Mac App Store. You play as Momoko and fight off the Waru across 5 different locales. The game is part platformer, part beat 'em up. You jump, you kick, you do her jumping split kick, and transform into Wonder Momo. While in Wonder form, she's able to fire projectiles from her hands. They're strong, but it drains the Wonder Bar, which keeps you in Wonder mode. The game's namesake comes from the Typhoon Booster move. When the Wonder Bar is maxed out, transform and a Typhoon Booster defeats everything on screen. She also has access to the Wonder Hoop that bounces across the screen. This is the main feature of the game, really. You're encouraged to keep a combo chain going with the Wonder Hoop. If you hit 8 enemies during a certain amount of time, and without getting hit, you get a token. What do tokens do? Well, the game doesn't have a save feature. You have to finish it in one sitting. And the game can be pretty tough your first time playing. Especially on this boss, there's so much going on. So when you get a game over, you use a token to continue. This is how you get better at the game. By restarting and stringing combos together, you'll earn more tokens and in turn, more chances to make it to the end. Although once you beat the game, there is a level select. But tokens aren't just extra lives. In between worlds, there's the Momo Catcher. It's a crane minigame that requires one token to play. Prizes include artwork, songs, and even more tokens. There's an entire gallery mode and the additions are so cool. You can listen to the music you've unlocked and view concept artwork. I love this kind of stuff. They even included pages from the webcomic. According to James, the Nvidia Shield version has every issue. Wow. The soundtrack is amazing. It has remixes of the classic Momo tunes and some new ones. It was done by Jake Kaufman, with some pieces taken from the anime. I have to mention the Tyranno boss. When it starts, everything is in black and white, with a song played in low quality. But when changing into Wonder Momo, color comes out, and the music becomes much livelier. The theme itself is a clear love letter to kaiju and tokusatsu songs. I love it. There's a very old school feeling to the game. Part of me feels like if there was a sequel to the original Wonder Momo back in the 80s, it would be like this. Speaking of the original, the final boss is the original Amazona. In the story, the Waru King has taken Aki's power orb and gives it back to Amazona. This is just so cool. James said that they didn't know what the comic team was planning story-wise, so decided to throw a curveball and revive Amazona. They also felt finding a way to reference the arcade game would be a lot of fun. And if you haven't guessed, I think it's the coolest final boss they could have come up with. There's also a 2-player mode with the second player taking control of Momoko's mother. Some of the character dialogue changes when playing with 2 players, so it keeps things fresh. Both players share the combo chain, and things can get pretty hectic. By the way, all the voice actors from the anime reprised their roles, and James and the team were really excited to work with Haruko Momoi. Overall, this is a great game. James said Namco gave the team a lot of freedom when designing the game, after seeing how much fun it can be to chain attacks with the Wonder Hoop. Unfortunately, the game was released in May 2014, 2 months after Shifty Look shut down. The team was really shocked by this, but luckily everyone on the Way Forward and Namco sides decided to push ahead and get the game released. It was delisted roughly 6 months after release, and plans to port it over to the PC were cancelled. I hope one day it can get a re-release, maybe as part of a compilation or something. On March 10th, 2014, just about 2 years after launching, Shifty Look announced they were shutting down everything. The comics, the YouTube channel, the mobile games, Namco High, everything. Some comics had to hastily end before it shut down, while others got no resolution, notably Konoha and Tower of Babel. The question is, why? Well, most likely Shifty Look wasn't generating enough revenue to keep it afloat.
Well, when Shifty Look shut down, it wasn't a super surprise. Every 6 months or so, they're like, okay, we're going to be asking Namco to keep going. We don't know if we're going to keep going, but we'll see. And they were successful for a few years and continuing to get it funded. But I think the problem was that the plan kind of changed. Originally, the idea was that Shifty Look would just kind of make webcomics and generate interest, and then if there was interest, then the main company, Namco, would maybe make a video game or something. And at some point, I guess that changed, and I don't know if it was Shifty Look's idea that they want to take on more, if Namco changed what they expected of them, but it became that Shifty Look kind of had to generate some income to justify itself, it seemed.
He's got a point. There weren't any ads on the webcomics. Let's look at ways Shifty Look tried monetizing their projects. Optional payments in a spin-off mobile game, optional payments in a browser dating sim, physical books of some comics, shared with Udon, the Wonder Momo game, released after Shifty Look closed, and that's pretty much it. Some merch was sold, but not a lot. There's nothing confirmed, but if I had to guess, I would say Namco probably had a bigger plan to profit from Shifty Look, but for one reason or another, those plans never happened. I don't think Shifty Look would have even started if this is all they had planned for making money. Also, Namco didn't market Shifty Look all too well. Despite getting top-of-the-line artists and writers, the vision of Shifty Look never caught on with the public. When I went to New York Comic Con in 2012, Shifty Look absolutely absorbed the show floor. It was decked out with so many arcade cabinets. The experience itself was fantastic. I got to play the arcade version of Legend of Valkyrie for the very first time. This was its official North American debut, but I believe most people just saw it as an arcade at Comic-Con. I went there with a friend, and afterwards he had no idea they were promoting webcomics and cartoons. He was just there for the games. Check out this video by GameSpot where they explored the 2012 San Diego Comic-Con arcade. The focus is entirely on the games, not Shifty Look. In fact, Rob Parita, the editor-in-chief of Shifty Look, has to approach them to explain Shifty Look's plans and what they're all about. So while they certainly pulled people in with the games, they didn't sell the idea well. And when you're spending big bucks for big talent and you don't see a return quickly, it's kind of obvious why it closed. Shifty Look was also brought over to Japan, but was overlooked. Both Charlie and Edmund mentioned that they weren't aware their work was translated in Japanese. When Shifty Look said they were shutting down, they meant it. For a long time, almost everything about Shifty Look became lost media. Fortunately, people were able to track down every single comic page and animated short. Namco High was backed up, and you can play it by downloading the files. And while Shifty Look is gone, it left a great legacy, both for fans and creators. Everyone I talked with had only positive things to say about Shifty Look.
Overall, it was fun. They had so much creative freedom to play with these existing properties. Got to create a lot of fun characters, meet some really cool people in the industry, and I'd say it was overall really great. We got paid like premium comic industry rates. So everybody was happy with that. Nobody, the company didn't like go bankrupt and screw over a bunch of creators like often happens because they were a sub studio of a parent company. So there was nobody who really got hurt in the end.
Jim Zub said it was a pleasure to work on and tackle multiple game-related projects at once. Charlie Davis stated it was a good experience. I had a lot of creative freedom to make an official comic about a series of games I was always interested in, and it paid well too. James Montagna said he was honored to work with Namco and be part of the wonderfully outlandish and ambitious vision that was Shifty Look. Brian Clevinger fondly thinks about Namco High regularly, and is thankful for the project introducing him to his talented co-writers. As for Edmund,
I loved it. I wish we had done more. I wish we had a longer runway. I thought the overall concept for Shifty Look was great. It made a lot of sense to me.
Edmund also went on to say that he had ideas for other comics that he hoped to pitch.
We were actually in the process of pitching other titles. So I was looking at some sci-fi ones like the Bosconian, which is one of the shooters, and Splatterhouse was another one. Yeah, we had some wild ideas.
He also mentioned that he and Gunship Revolution made concept art for a Burning Force project that never came to be. Nowadays, you don't hear too much about Shifty Look anymore, but when you do, it's usually something good. It's still incredible that one of the world's largest video game companies handed over the keys for a multitude of their IPs. It was something really special. Namco's classic cast still makes appearances in games today, so they won't be forgotten anytime soon. In fact, the Wonder Momo comic was just recently mentioned by Namco on one of their YouTube channels. Maybe one day Namco will revisit an idea like Shifty Look. It might just be a footnote in Namco's history now, but like Pearl Buck said, Namco looked to the future by looking at their past. I hope one day they'll look back on Shifty Look and be inspired for something equally ambitious.